Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and today we're going to be talking about conceptually sort of the world of web design and web concepts, so that way no matter where you're working, what you're doing, you conceptually understand what's going on to be able to work in that space. And today we're going to be focusing on the back end. So again, last time we talked about the front end, which was like the browser. So when I click on a link in the browser, it's making a request, specifically a GET request to some server somewhere. The server receives the request, and then the server does a bunch of stuff. That's your back-end logic. Everything sort of between the request and the response. So when it happens, okay, a request is received by your server, it has to sit there and say, what am I going to send back? It could just be sending back some basic data. Okay, but where's that data coming from? It might be in a database on that server or in some other server. So it has to go retrieve that data from that database and then send it back. Okay, it might be sending back a page. So it has HTML, CSS, and JavaScript stored somewhere that's going to send back and say, hey, this is the website. Okay, and you might decide to dynamically inject data into that HTML, CSS, and JavaScript through what's called templating. That happens on the server side. Although, again, with the advent of single page applications, a lot of that has been shifted over into the front end using things like Angular, React, and Vue, instead of doing it on the server side to speed things up. But that's essentially what it's doing, basically, and this is where the whole term model view controller comes in, because generally you can use any language to do the back end because you're not relying on the customer's or the client's browser. So you're not worried if that browser knows how to read this language or that language. It's all about your computer and the environment you create on your server. So you can have a server that runs a web framework for any language. And generally a back-end web framework in any language handles several different things. It handles routing, meaning when telling the server that when a request comes in for this particular URL, what to respond with. So that's the routing side of it. There is session. So basically the idea is, hey, someone logs in, your backend does all the checks to make sure that you've logged in with the right information, checking the database. We want to create a little cookie, a little thing that helps us remind us that this person is logged in for a period of time. That's session. We also handle things like how to handle the request body, like how to extract data from the request. All these different things are handled by your backend web framework. Okay, so when you learn a web framework, whether it's like Python with Django and Flask, whether you're talking about Node.js, which has frameworks like Express, Koa, and Foal.js, Foalts, or if you're talking about Go with Buffalo and Mux, or you're talking about PHP with Laravel and CodeIgniter and Symfony, whether you're talking about Ruby with Rails and Sinatra. Every web framework essentially has these pieces or ways to assemble these pieces. Routing, session, authentication, validation. Validation being making sure that when data is sent in, we're receiving the right data that we expected. It's being put away in the way that we expected in the database. And then when we pull out, we're only pulling out the data that we need. Okay, it's not just saying, hey, I want this, I want this. There's got to be little pieces, snippets of code that validates that you put the right data in, you took the right data out by the right user at the right time. So this is all part of your backend logic. And this is why a lot of people have shifted the visual end. So again, a lot of that server-side rendering of pages where you would take a template of a website and mix it with the information and then send that as a response, a lot of that has shifted over to the front end. Instead of just sending that whole rendered page as a response, now you're sending the data and the single page application, and the single page application will request data as it needs it, making for sort of a faster user experience. Okay, so let me repeat that and make that very clear. Once upon a time, you would make you still do this with a lot of websites, and a lot of new websites still do this, but you would make a request, the server would get it, it would go get the information from the database, validate the information, say, hey, here's my HTML template and my CSS, my JavaScript that has a bunch of slots slicked in for me to put this information in, mix them together, render it at the server, and then send it to the client, which then renders it on the browser. But all the data manipulation happened on the server. So you're asking for that server to go get the information and render the template. You're asking it to do two things, which means it's going to take extra time. So what some people have done to speed up the time is they said, you know what, we're only going to have the server send information. So when you make that initial request for the website, instead what you're getting back is what's I mentioned in the previous video, a single page application, which is done on the front end. So you're creating this website that's all sort of being rendered by the browser, and then has all those empty slots for information. But instead of it all being mixed together at the server, you have the single page application, which basically will make separate requests for data as needed to the server. So instead of one request having the full website, so you have to wait for all of it to be put together, you're getting the single page application in one request, and then it's making smaller requests to grab the information and manipulate the data. It's interacting with the server in smaller instances. And another benefit of this is by creating a server backend application that only serves data, which for simplification purposes, you can refer to this as an API. So instead of serving up the whole website, it's only serving up the data for the website, serving up data that you can use, not just in the website that you're creating, but other people can pull that information for their website or other applications. It's referred to as an API typically. So another benefit of that is, since all the data is there and anyone can call it, it's just, and use it however they want, you can now create multiple applications for multiple platforms without having to recreate the usage of the data. So you can create a mobile application that makes use of the API you created. You can create a desktop application that makes use of that API. You can create your web application. You don't need to do the back piece again and again and again. You only have to redevelop the front. So that's a benefit on top of the speed of this sort of newer way of architecting web applications. But again, every web framework can facilitate the creation of an API, facilitate the routing of your web server, all that. Okay, so hopefully this makes it much clearer what the differences between the backend and the front end is. What does a web framework do for you? Okay, a front end or a back end. So a front end web framework is going to help you create like a single page application. So basically create the logic so that way you can build a website that's rendered on the front, be able to easily work with data that you pull in from API requests, and create it in a smooth, easy to develop experience to create robust, scalable applications, versus a back-end framework, which is going to handle your website's routing, could handle templating, is going to handle the ability to create APIs, manipulate data, interface with databases at the server level. So being rendered in the browser, front end, being rendered at the server, back end. And there are web frameworks for both. And sometimes there's web frameworks that handle both in one, which would be referred to as a full stack web framework, because it's handling the full stack, front and back. So my name is Alex Merced from Alex Merced Coder. Make sure to go check out my website and learn more. There's videos of me going through different front end and back end frameworks, so that way you can learn a little bit more about what's out there, how they work. Make sure to check out my developer networking Slack, read my Medium articles, follow me on Twitter. Have a great day and enjoy.